In this video, I'm going to go over the grade 9 biological diversity practice test. Now, this PAT was released as a practice for this specific unit. What I recommend is downloading it from the description below, trying it yourself, and then following along with the answers that I'm going to provide. Okay, let's start off with question 1 here. So question 1 asks, one advantage of asexual reproduction. So for this, we need to be very clear about what asexual reproduction is. So this is a special type of reproduction that requires no mate. In fact, jellyfish, along with some plants, do this. Whereas you can see here, they're able to just kind of create an extension of themselves and it's going to pop up and become a new individual. Now, some of the cool things about this is it's very, very quick and it's very efficient because you don't actually need to find a mate. Now, this is contrasted with sexual reproduction, where an organism needs to find a mate, and then when creating the offspring, the genes are mixed. And this is really important because it allows for variation so that the new generation has a better chance of surviving because they've got a different set of genes than the original parents. Okay, now if that didn't make sense, take a look at this graphic here and make sure you're really clear about the similarities and differences of these two. I recommend a Venn diagram. Okay, let's apply all that information to this question here. So option A says asexual reproduction would lead to greater variation within the species. Well, as I said before, we're just making a copy of itself, so there's no room for variation here. The parent is going to be the exact same as the offspring or the baby. Option B allows offspring to adapt to environmental changes quickly. Again, there's not really any variation happening, so any environmental changes that affect the parent are going to directly impact the offspring. So this option is not going to work. Option C leads to long-term bonds between offspring and parent. So again, as we can see with those examples, once the new organism is made, it kind of just buds off and does its own thing. So this would not really work. There's not really a lot of time to create that bonding that other organisms do have with their offspring. Option D allows a population to grow substantially over a short period of time. Now this one is definitely going to be it because, as I said before, it's super quick and it does mean the population can take over relatively quick. So our answer to this question is going to be answer D. Okay, question 2 here. So we've got a diagram here. We've got a couple of processes that are happening. And let's be clear about this process before we even read the question. So we've got our adults. The adult is going to create sex cells. From there, we're going to get a zygote, an embryo, and then of course the embryo is going to grow into another adult. Now the question's asking, at which stage does fertilization happen? Now fertilization is the mixing of DNA or the mixing of the sex cells. So what we need to do is we need to look here and decide where do those cells get mixed together. So with the adults, creating the sex cells, well, that's not really going to be it, right? There's no real mixing. Each organism is just creating its individual unique sex cells. Now if we look at process 2, we can see we create a zygote. So a zygote is the almost precursor to an offspring. So clearly here we have a full organism that was made from the sex cells. So that means process 2 is definitely going to be the spot where fertilization took place. So our answer here is going to be option B. Okay, question 3 here. Now with question 3, there's kind of a couple of things that we need to be really clear of. It's basically allowing us to look at these options here and see how they all impact each other, recognizing that one downfall in our chain can obviously have an impact further down the line. So let's see what's happening here. So we know the wolves eat the elks. We know the elks eat the willow shrubs. Now the willow shrubs are important because the more shrubs that grow, the more they're going to cool the water, and then that cool water is going to allow the bull trout to survive. Okay, so we got to keep those factors in mind in order to answer this question. So question 3 asks, which of the following changes is most likely to occur as a result of a decreased wolf population? So basically what's happening is something happened here and the wolf population, of course, decreased. So let's look at our factors here. So if the wolves were to decrease, well, what's going to happen to the population of the elk? So let's think about this. They eat elk. This means the elk population is going to go up because there's no predators for them. Well, that means if they're going to go up, they're going to need more food. So that means the willow shrubs are going to go down. However, if the willow shrubs go down, that means they're no longer able to cool that nice warm water. So that means if they're not able to cool the warm water, it means our bull trouts, well, they're not really going to have much of a place to stay, right? They need that cool temperature in order to survive. So that means the bull trout's actually going to be decreased. So looking at our options here, there's only one option that says a decreased number of bull trout. So in this case, our answer is going to be C. Okay, question number 4. So with question number 4, we have to look at our graph. So I'm actually just going to zoom in here and let's see what's going on with this visual representation here. So this is looking at the study of number of individuals of 4 species before and after an insect infestation. So we can see that infestation right there. So clearly what happened is as that population of insects increased, our species decreased, which is common when we're fighting over resources. Now, our question's asking us, given the trends in the graph shown above, the species that is most genetically diverse. So we need to think about what diversity means. So diversity basically means we've got different aspects to surviving. If we want a population to survive throughout different kind of natural disasters, it must be diverse in order to adapt to the new conditions that it's going to be faced. So which of these organisms really are going to be resilient and are going to continue to thrive even after that infestation? So one thing that I noticed is with this option here, we see our population thriving, but they don't come back. So that means this one is definitely not going to be an option. All right, now let's look at our other letters. So I've got species W. Well, species W, they do really, really well after the infestation. However, they don't do so well in the beginning. So while they're probably thriving after, it doesn't really show an indication of diversity because they weren't thriving before. So that one's not going to work for us. Let's look at species X. So species X, we can see that they were doing actually quite well before the infestation. They had a plummet, which is normal, and then they continue to bounce back. So I am liking this as an option. That's a really good one. Let's double check why before we make our decision. So with species Y, what happens is they too were also quite doing well before the infestation. Again, their population declined. However, we can see in order for them to bounce back, it took them a lot of time. So while they probably do show some genetic diversity, again, the question says the most genetically diverse, so that's not going to be Y, in comparison to X, of course. So our answer to this question is going to be species X. Okay, question number 5 here. So question 5 is asking us to say, well, okay, what's the responding variable in the study shown above? So the responding variable is going to be what we are measuring. So in this case here, if I'm looking at my graph, well, we're measuring the number of individuals. And almost always the responding variable, or what we're measuring, is going to be on the y-axis of a graph. So that means our answer is going to be the number of individuals, so C. Okay, number 6. So number 6, it wants to know which of the following human traits is not heritable. So for something to be heritable, basically it means you get it from your parents, and it's talking specifically about the genes that you get from your parents. So it's something that is not shaped by the environment. So for something to be not heritable, we need to try and think which of the following are not a part of our genes. So the first option is manners. Well, manners is something of having good manners, or even bad manners for that matter, is often something that you learn from your environment. So this one looks like a pretty good option, but let's double check the rest. So option B says blood type. Well, blood type you're definitely going to get from your parents. There's only a couple options of those, and those are based on what your parents have. And that would be your biological parents, by the way. For C, the number of teeth, well, humans are set with roughly a certain number of teeth that they're supposed to get. That can vary depending on different genetics, but again, that is rooted in genetics. And then with D, we're looking at the length of a forearm. Again, that's coming back from what your parents look like. So in this case, the best option is going to be option A, where we are looking at the manners, which are something that can be learned from the environment and not something that are based on your genes. Okay, one of my favorite questions here. So question number 7, they gave us a map of North America and South America. And in fact, my mom is from this little country here. Story for a different day, but just thought I'd mention it. So we want to know which of the following countries would be most biologically diverse. Now, when we're thinking of organisms being biologically diverse, we almost always want them close to the equator. And the reason for that is the equator fosters really nice tropical temperatures, along with seasons and temperatures that are consistent throughout the year. This means lots of organisms have opportunity to resources all year round. Therefore, you're going to see the most amount of diverse organisms there. A good way to think about it is even us as humans, kind of living in Canada, we don't even like our winters, right? We have adaptations to survive for our winters, but we do want to go to a place that is nice, warm, probably have lots of beaches, whatever the case may be. So we often do fly down here for spring. So just like humans, other organisms do the same thing, especially organisms that have the ability to fly. So that means the equator is going to hold lots and lots of different organisms. So we need to look for an answer, or we need to look for a country that's close to the equator. Therefore, the only answer for this one would be Brazil. So our answer for this question is going to be option D. Okay, number 8 here. So with number 8, we're going to use this information to, of course, answer the question. So let me read this out loud. A man and woman who both have brown hair have 3 children. 2 of the children have brown hair and 1 child has blonde hair. The gene that codes for the brown hair is dominant to the gene that codes for blonde hair. So that basically means the blonde hair is recessive, but the brown is dominant. So I'm going to represent it with something like this. I'm going to use the capital B to represent the dominant trait of brown hair and the lowercase b to represent the recessive trait of blonde hair. Now let's think about what's happening here. We have 3 children we have 2 children that have brown hair. So those children, although we might not know the exact genotype, we can assume that because they have a blonde sister, those 2 children with the brown hair might be something like this. Okay, could be different, but that's what we can assume. Now we know the 3rd child has blonde hair. That means they have to have 2 copies of the recessive gene. So now that I've filled out a portion of my Punnett square, I can work backwards. So that means one parent has to be big B, little b, and the other parent must also be the same, giving rise to the child here that's blonde. Now, keep in mind, I didn't do a super great job on the Punnett square, but that's because the goal of this question is to figure out what the parents are, given that they have a child that's blonde and they're both brown hairs. So this means that the parents have to be heterozygous. That means they carry the gene for blonde hair, even though they don't express it. So we need to find an option here that shows they carry the gene for blonde hair. So that's going to be, why don't we go through them and decide? So it is possible that neither parent has a gene that codes for blonde hair. Well, that's not true, because if that was the case, then every organism would be big B, big B. Option B, it's necessary that both parents have a gene that codes for blonde hair. That one's probably true, so I'm just gonna circle it, but as always, we wanna check our options before we make a decision. So option C, it is possible that one parent has the gene that codes for blonde hair and the other parent does not have the gene that codes for blonde hair. Well, since the organism requires 2 copies of it, it means both parents have to have it, so that one's not gonna work. Okay, let's look at D. It is necessary that one parent has the gene that codes for blonde hair and that the other parent does not have the gene that codes for blonde hair. So that's kind of the same thing that I was saying before, so that's not going to work. That leaves us with option B as our answer, where in order to have a child that is both little b, both parents must contain at least 1 gene that has the little b. Which structures carry information about heritable traits? So heritable traits is just a fancy way of saying, well, which option is talking about our genes? Well, our first option is chromosomes, which I really do like, because chromosomes are basically, so chromosomes contain all the DNA that are wrapped around special proteins, and in fact, we can sometimes see them during parts of cell division. So to me, that's a good one. Option B talks about carbohydrates. Well, carbohydrates are food. So that's gonna be like our fruit or our vegetable. So that's not really gonna work. Option C is proteins. Well, proteins, again, that's not really something that's gonna carry our genes. And D is lipids. Well, those are fats. or oils. So none of those are really going to contain information about heritable traits. The only thing that does is going to be our chromosomes. Okay, everyone, we are halfway there, and congratulations if you stuck this far. That is fantastic. All right, so let's look at number 10. Number 10 says that human cells normally have 46 chromosomes. So that is true. Now we want to know if a human cell contains 23 chromosomes. Well, where do those 23 chromosomes come from? So the first thing we can say is to go from here to here, we had to divide the number of chromosomes by half. Now there's only one process where we take our DNA and we cut them in half, or I shouldn't say DNA, we take our chromosomes and we cut them in half. So the only process that's going to do that is meiosis. So mitosis, remember, creates an exact copy. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to cut down the number of chromosomes. So that's not going to work. A zygote is a full organism that is going to have 46 chromosomes, which we talked about in that previous question. And same deal, an embryo is just a larger version of a zygote. So that leaves us with our option of meiosis, which is cell division. And the whole goal of that type of cell division is to create our sex cells. So we have to reduce the number of chromosomes in half. Numerical response here. So remember, with numerical response, when you are working on your PAT, you are going to have to fill that out in some bubbles. But let's look at our question here. So we want to use the following code to indicate the type of variation that's associated with each human trait below. So we've got discrete variation and continuous variation. So if we remember, discrete variation is kind of like saying you either have the trait or you don't. So a good example of this would be like the widow's peak. You either have the widow's peak at your forehead or you don't. Another example might be the attached earlobes. Your earlobes are either attached to this part of your jawline here or they're not. There's no in between. With continuous variation, what we're saying is there is a possible range of options. So a good example of that is actually in this question here. And a lot of you might have done this in your lifetime or even in grade 9. So when you are looking at a classroom and you measure your height compared to all the other kids in your class, you are measuring continuous variation because there's no set height. There's a multiple range of options of how tall you can be. So let's look at these examples here. For our first one, you either have wet or dry earwax. So with that one again, it's only one option or the other. So that's going to be a number 1 there. For number 2, you've got height. So you might have done this when you are in school. You might have done this in grade 9 where you measure your height in comparison to everybody else. If you've noticed, everyone has a slightly different height. While you can have 2 people that are the exact same height, there might be small variations, even if it's a millimeter. So that does give us a continuous variation, lots of ranges of options there. The other one is hand size. Same deal, lots of options with how wide our hand can be. So this is going to also be continuous variation. So our answer for this is 1, 2, 2. And then just as a reminder, you're going to need to put that on your bubble sheet. You're going to write the number at the top and then fill in those bubbles below. Okay, number 11 here. We need to look at some of the causes of species extinction. Okay, so we've got a couple of reasons. We've got disease, overharvesting, loss of habitat, and natural disasters. Now, the question's asking, we want to know which of these are most directly related to human activity. So basically what it's asking is, what are some things that humans have done that have caused species to become extinct? While sometimes we can have a role in certain diseases, diseases do tend to spread on their own. They also tend to develop in their own. So this one could work, but it's probably not the one that's most likely directly related to human activity. Overharvesting. So overharvesting means we take too much. Most of the time we do this for our food production. So this one looks like a good option. Loss of habitat. Well, again, that's another option too, where as we continue to provide habitats for ourselves, create homes for ourselves, we are taking over the natural habitat that the organisms have used before. So this is another good option. An option to answer the question. Of course, not a good thing that we're doing it. Our fourth option is natural disasters. Well, natural disasters are not really in our control. That's something that all species in the world can get affected by. So that means our answer to this question is going to be anything with the options of 2 and 3. And so I see that right there, that's going to be option C. So our answer to this question is C. Okay, number 12 here. So this one is a little bit lengthy in reading it. So let's just read each point together and then we'll apply it to the question. So for first point, it says army cutworm larvae eat the foliage of many commercial crops such as wheat and alfalfa. So what that's trying to say is that these army cutworm, they basically eat our food, if they get a chance to, I should say. The second point says army cutworm larvae feed from April to end of May, at which they may develop into moths. So again, that just means that that's the season from April to the end of May is where they might actually be feeding a lot. And it also means that probably by the end of May, maybe June, you may develop a lot of moths in that area. Our third point says tiny wasps paralyzes army cutworm. Oh, so that means that might be its predator. They paralyze the army cutworm larvae by laying a single egg in a larva. Okay, so that's important to recognize because it means these wasps probably do something to those cutworm. Let's look at our last point. Army cutworm larvae that are paralyzed remain in the larval stage longer than those who are not that's parasitized, not paralyzed, sorry. Okay, let's keep going. If the population of our wasps is large, so basically that means our wasps start to increase, then the amount of wheat produced is expected. Okay, so we have to think of those like chain of events again. So we've increased the wasps. Well, that means our moths are probably not going to develop, but it doesn't mean our larvae are going to stay larvae, right? Our organisms are going to stay like a larvae for much longer. So let's think about what's going to happen here. If they are a parasite to the cutworm, that means the larvae are going to probably decrease. So we can take out anything that's going to increase, because what that means is you have a longer larvae lasting, which means the wheat that's produced can decrease because you've got more predators, aka the larvae, that's able to consume them. I hope that one made sense. So if that's gonna decrease, then we have to think about why that wheat production will decrease. Well, it's gonna decrease because the larvae basically are staying larvae for a longer period of time. They've got more time to eat on the crops, right? So that means our answer here, is gonna be A. Okay, question number 13. So a Labrador retriever has 78 chromosomes in each of its skin cells. Okay, so that's important. We've got 78 chromosomes in each of its skin cells. Now the question says, which of the following rows identifies the type of cell division that would allow the retriever to produce other skin cells, and identifies the number of chromosomes that would be expected to be produced? So the key thing with this one is we're looking at skin cells. So that means we have to think back to our two types of cell division. With meiosis, we're creating sex cells. Those sex cells are going to combine to create a new organism. In this question here, we're looking at skin cells. That means we're looking for growth. So that is going to be our other type of cell division, which is mitosis. Mitosis means you are making an exact copy of the original cell. So in this case, we're saying, here's our skin cell, and now we've made another type of skin cell. So the number of chromosomes have to be identical. So in order to answer this, the first thing I can do is look at which one of my chromosomes, my number of chromosomes, are identical to the ones that are in the skin cells. Well, there's only two options for those. And then, as I said before, it has to be related to mitosis because mitosis is used for growth and cell division. So our only option that is mitosis with the same number of chromosomes is option D. Okay, number 14 here. Gregor Mendel, an Australian monk, experimented with pea plants. He observed that when a plant that produced round seed was mated with a plant that produced wrinkled seeds, the resulting offspring only produced round seeds. Okay, so now we have to use that information to answer the question. So the question's asking us, the observation made by Mendel supports the inference that wrinkled seed traits. Okay, so we have to think about those wrinkled seeds. What's happening with them? Well, if we are looking at here, let's go back and see what's happening. We're saying that when you mate a round seed and a wrinkled seed, you're only getting round seeds. Well, that means we're probably looking at recessives in the sense that the wrinkled is going to be recessive because it's not showing up in this case here. So that means I can cross off options A and B. They're both talking about dominant traits. Now let's look and remind ourselves what a recessive trait is. So a recessive trait is one that tends to show up if the dominant one isn't present. So if we're looking at our options of C and D, C says recessive and still part of the DNA's offspring. So I like that one because it's still there. It just might be overshadowed by the dominant trait, in this case, the round seeds. Option D says recessive and no longer part of the offspring DNA. Well, we know that's not true because there's lots of cases of a recessive trait showing down, even though multiple recessive trait showing up after multiple generations. So that means our option for this one is definitely going to be C. Okay, number 15 here, 5 more to go. All right, so for number 15, we have a graph, okay? So we've got 4 species of insects that consume nectar from fireweed plants as a component of their diet. So they're, of course, feeding on these type of plants and they need that to survive. The graph below shows the relationship between the population of each of the 4 insects and the population of the firewood plants in a test area, okay? So we've got our species listed here, and we can see that there's a key or a legend, and we can see that each species has a unique trend as we look at the fireweed plant population. All right, let's keep that in mind for our question. An inference that can be made from the graph above is that the insect species that is most likely to survive in the changing environmental conditions. Okay, so really what it's asking kind of goes back to that question we talked about previously with the diversity of organisms. We're saying somewhere the environment changed, and we want to know which species was most likely to survive that change. Well, looking at the graph, there's really only one option, and that option is going to be this one right here. This organism has consistently, no matter what happens with other parts of the environment, it consistently survives. Yes, its population goes slightly up and down, but it is still consistently surviving compared to our organism here that is only surviving with a certain environmental condition. Our other organism peaks and then drops, and same idea with this organism here. So now we look at our key and we say, well, what matches that one? The only thing that's going to match for that one here is going to be species 2. We can see those lines are the same. So our answer for this question is going to be B. Question number 16. Which of the following statements describes variation within a species? So we need to think there's variation between species and variations within species. So if it's within species, my best example to use for that is humans, right? While we are all part of the human population, there are variations within us, whether that's within our own family or even the difference between you and I right now. So we want to know which of the following is looking at the same species but has some slight differences. So option A, unlike other owl species which prefer to nest in trees, burrowing owls nest underground. So that could be an option. That's a possibility. So I'm just going to put a little star on that one. Let's look at B. A bull trout and a brook trout look similar, but bull trouts lack black markings on its fins. Well, they kind of gave a hint there. They said they look similar, meaning that while they look similar, they're not the same organism. So it can't be option B. Option C, some lodgepole pine trees grow branches near the top. Some grow branches along the whole length of its tree. Okay, I like that one. I really like that one because they're both talking about pine trees. So that's a pretty good option. I'm going to star that as well. Let's look at D. So D says grizzly bears can be distinguished from black bears. Well, right off the bat, we're looking at 2 different kinds of bears. I'll finish the question or the option. By their broad, round faces and large humps of muscle on their shoulders. So again, it's talking about 2 different organisms, so it can't be that. So let's circle back to A and C. With A, one of the things that is interesting about it is it talks about most other owl species. So remember, we're looking for variation within a species. Since it's comparing most owl species, it means we're taking all the owl species and putting them together. So therefore, it actually can't be option A because it's not looking at variation within one species. So our answer for this one is going to be option C. Okay, number 17. Which of the following heritable human traits is least likely to be influenced by the environment? So we want to think of basically what they're asking us is which of the following is more likely to be part of our genes. So our weight can fluctuate with environmental conditions of what we choose to do in terms of exercise and what we eat. So that one is really going to be more about the environment than about our genes. Option B, hair color. Well, I mean, my hair color is a great example of it, right? It's really dark and I've lightened it. So that, again, is the environment. And we want to know which one is least likely to be influenced by the environment. Length of foot. The length of foot can be mostly genes. However, anything that goes back to that continuous variation, that is height or size, can be somewhat shaped by the environment. So the example of that, in case you're confused about that one, would be the more people, especially children and teenagers, have access to food and resources, the more they're going to reach their maximum growth. So in places where that's not the case, they may show signs of, I don't want to say stunting, but they just may not grow as much as what they should be because they don't have access to some of the same resources in terms of food. So that one can be influenced by the environment. It's just, again, our question's asking us the least likely. So in this case, the least likely is going to be D, the earlobe attachment. Again, it goes back to that discrete variation. You either have your ear attached to that part of your jawline or you don't. All right, number 18 here. Which of the following statements describe a trait that is most likely a result of artificial selection? So with artificial selection, we're basically saying humans do the selecting. So we need to decide with these options which ones are going to be ones where we as humans are doing the selecting. So it says here we've got a wheat. It's used today in pasta, was grown from seeds chosen for their high protein and gluten content. So that means we've probably chosen it for a reason and continue to use it for our pasta. So I do like that option. Let's look at the rest just to be sure. Option B says the beak of golden eagle is sharp and strong, which makes it useful for ripping and tearing meats. So that's a really cool adaptation that's shaped by its environment, but we didn't really select for it. It just naturally did that. So that one would be more natural selection. Option C, the broad leaves on a maple tree make it efficient for gathering sunlight for photosynthesis. So again, really cool that it can photosynthesize, but we're not really the ones that are responsible for that. It's just naturally doing that. So that one's not gonna work in the context of this question. Let's look at D. Wolves have large ridges of backbone on their back of their skulls that allow anchoring of strong jaw muscles. So again, while that's cool, it's not really us selecting for that. So our answer here is going to be D, or excuse me, is going to be A. Okay, numerical response number 2 here. So we've got a couple of things that are happening. We've got some headlines here, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to look at these headlines and we're going to apply them to which conservation strategy they're most likely talking about. So let's go through and read the headlines first. So number 1, animal trafficking can be stopped. Number 2, Banff National Park celebrates anniversary. Number 3, baby elephant born at City Zoo. Number 4, disease destroys rare plant species. All right, so let's look at their first option, captive breeding programs. Well, to breed means you're increasing the population of the organism. So in order to do that, you would probably have to have some babies being born. And lots of zoos do this. They make sure organisms that might be extinct can breed to continue the population further. Our second option says establishment of seed banks. So seed banks are basically special seeds that are saved in case if a plant is destroyed, we have the seeds to bring them back and let them continue to thrive on Earth. So for that one, there's only one real option that talks about plants. So if a disease destroys a rare plant, well, we've got our seed banks to make sure the plant isn't actually destroyed. So we can now eliminate option 3 and 4. Let's look at our next statement. Designation of protected areas. So with this, the protected area is going to fit best with Banff National Park. And that's because lots of our parks are designed to make sure organisms have a safe home to make sure humans don't threaten that area. So for that option, we're definitely going to look at number 2 as the matching headline. And finally, with our last one, development of international treaties. Well, if we can all agree that certain animals need to be protected, and we can agree with that on a global scale, it means animals won't be trafficked or exploited. So in this case here, we're going to put number 1 with that matching headline. So our answer is going to be 3, 4, 2, and 1. Okay, I really hope that helped everybody. Keep in mind, I do have that other video that goes through the biological diversity PAT if that's something you're interested in. I also want to take this time to remind everybody that I do hold private one-on-one sessions. All the information for that is listed down below. So good luck studying, and I hope to help you again in the future.